Thank you, Matt, for that kind introduction. And good evening, everybody. And thank you for coming. I look forward to sharing with you something that the things I've learned about the Collins drugstore and also about the fates of small town pharmacies in the country. But I knew my fate was sealed when Jerry Hyman contacted me after I wrote a letter to the editor of the Record Patriot last year, thanking the McCrae family for its great service to the community through the corner drugstore, while also mentioning the merger of its pharmacy to the Shop and Save pharmacy in Benzonia. For generations, it was known as the Collins drugstore, named after the man who first established it in 1867. After 157 years of faithful service as a drugstore to the folks of Frankfort, I felt it deserved some recognition along with the many people that have made it such an important part of our community. Now, I've known Jerry for many a year, and this call was to ask that I give a talk on the subject at the Benzie Area Historical Society. And for those who know Jerry, you simply can't say no to him. But it's been proven to be a very fun project, mainly because it has given me the opportunity to get to know the community my wife Mika and I now call our permanent home. I would like to say I have pored over all of the documents I could find on the subject, generously given to me by Andrew Bolander, Faith Delaney, Myra Elias, and Marianne Short. I also spoke with Rick and Ben McCrae and spent delightful moments with Dee and Nancy Hewitt at their home in Traverse City. If any of you have any primary sources I could use to shed further light on the subject, I would gladly receive them and with my thanks. Now, Cicero is credited with having said, the first law of historical writing is the truth. As a disclaimer, and as humanly possible, I have tried to adhere to this doctrine rather than that of Mark Twain's, which was, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Well, you don't have to travel far to know that this town is captivated by its history, and for good reason. There is much to be proud about. A couple of years ago, while waiting in line at the Frankfort post office, getting ready for another pleasant conversation with Craig, Kelly, and Abby, I studied the mural above the postmaster's office door. As luck would have it, Carol Stack happened to be standing directly behind me, and following my gaze, she casually remarked, "You know, that courageous man up there barking orders to his crew, among whom just happened to be his son and also his brother to the right, was my grandfather, Captain Charles Frederickson, all in the service of trying to save ferry number 4 and themselves from an icy grave." By sheer coincidence, I learned that Carol was also the mother of a good friend and colleague of mine from Alma. The conversation which ensued outlasted our time in line and became a spark to learn more about the history of this very colorful harbor town. But I digress, and back to my theme. The Collins drugstore, its history, and the current challenges facing small town pharmacies. Sometime in 1867, John B. Collins, aka JB, arrived in Frankfort by stagecoach. He looked down Main Street with his piercing blue eyes and exclaimed, "You know, this harbor town needs a pharmacy." By then, he had traveled widely and no doubt had seen larger towns than Frankfort. This was the view you would have had of Main Street looking west from 3rd Street. JB was born in Erie, New York in 1838. So in 1867, he would have been 29 years old when he founded the drugstore here. When he was 19, he apprenticed as a druggist in Rochester, New York. He moved to Charlotte, Michigan, halfway between Lansing and Battle Creek, and opened a Collins drugstore there, later selling it to his cousin. He then traveled extensively, but eventually returned to work in a pharmacy in Rockford, Michigan, just north of Grand Rapids. There he met his future wife, Josephine Lapham. In addition He was a charter member of the Masons and was one of the 700 original Maccabees of Michigan, which promoted low-cost insurance for its members, as well as involvement in community interests and support. After buying a lot on the south side of Main Street, where Century 21 now stands, he went to Manistee to work temporarily at a drugstore while the new pharmacy was being built, all while living with his brother, Dr. Thomas Benton Collins. The canal of the Frankfort harbor had been dredged in 1859 and redredged in 1862. The village could boast of a very brisk traffic of boats carrying goods of all kinds. Indeed, it supplied the livelihood of most of the town. The channel was about 9 feet deep and could accommodate boats with much smaller drafts than that of the General Payne steamer. And it was on that boat in 1868 that J.B. brought a large stock of fixtures, patent medicines, wooden cabinets, and other supplies to start a new pharmacy. This is a picture of a Canadian steamer which foundered off Frankfort's coast in 1881, losing half its crew. I show this just as an illustration of what the General Payne would have looked like. Another boat, the Jenny Lind, manned by Charles Voorhees and B. Carrier, met the vessel off the coast and transported J.B. and his goods into the harbor. The boat shown here is the Jessie Slyfield, which would have resembled the Jenny Lind. Another recounting of the story had it that the General Payne steamer was so laden with J.B.'s goods, it could not negotiate the depths of the channel. Nevertheless, if there were cattle and oxen aboard the steamer, they would have been tossed overboard, and those animals that survived the swim to shore would have been rounded up on the beaches of Frankfort. The day after J.B. arrived with his goods, the store on the south side of Main Street was open for business. 1 year later, in 1869, J.B. moved the store directly across the street, midway between the 4th and 5th Street, on what he called the sunny side. He had noticed that business was far more brisk on the north side of Main Street, so he just picked up the house and moved, or picked up the store and moved over there. That very year, he was appointed the postmaster, the new store serving as the post office. As an aside, I find it fascinating that buildings were often moved with ease here, there, and yonder to the great satisfaction of its owners without difficulty at all. With foresight, he also purchased 2 lots at the corner of 4th and Main for future use. He no doubt saw commercial advantage in owning the real estate there. 9 years later, in 1878, the store was engulfed in flames, losing all of its contents. The future store of Charles Dietrichson would open in nearly the same site and suffer a similar fate about 100 years later. After the fire, and not accepting defeat, J.B. bought the east part of the Dalby House on the northeast corner of 2nd and Main and moved it down the street to the northeast corner of 4th and Main, where he had purchased those 2 lots 9 years before. A small house located deep on the property was moved just east to the newly transplanted half of the Dalby House. This small house served as a paint factory and later a barber shop. In due time, the new drugstore was open for business. As many of you know, the Dalby House was a boarding facility for seasonal laborers who worked the harbor, and no doubt has its own stories to tell. During the 26-year Benzie County seat wars, this building had been used as a courthouse with a jail in the rear. Mrs. B. Woodward, born Beatrice Lee, and a previous president of the Benzie Area Historical Society, remembered quite vividly gazing one Sunday afternoon out of her window in her home on Main Street and seeing a house being rolled down the street, down the avenue, and stopping right in front of her house at night. There it stayed until the following day. The newly transplanted house, now placed 8 feet from the northeast corner of 4th and Main, became the new drugstore and sat there until once again fire unsettled J.B.'s plan. A fire partially destroyed the paint factory next door. He moved his entire business once again, but further east, leaving the northeast corner of 4th and Main vacant. No matter, it was soon used as a bandstand for the best band that we know in northern Michigan. Now, by all accounts, the civic band that played on that bandstand was phenomenal. It played most Saturday nights until way beyond midnight, with people dancing freely in the streets. The band practiced regularly in one of the rooms on the second floor of the drugstore. The band was also a main feature of every city parade, with Lyman Sights leading the parade with his high-stepping horse. Here's a partial list of some of the local talent who performed. I came across no mention of JB's musical chops, but obviously he loved a tune or two. On the second floor of the drugstore, there were 3 rooms. The back one was used by George Auguste, the Greek, to make candy and roast nuts. The middle one was for storage, and the front one, heated by a wood-burning stove, was used for band practice, town council meetings, a courtroom for trials conducted by the circuit court, and meetings for sundry lodges and organizations like the Freemason. As we shall see, on a moment's notice, the circuit judge would often ask the pharmacist working downstairs to round up some of his customers to serve as in jury duty upstairs. On the first floor behind the pharmacy were 2 more rooms, one to compound medicines for people as well as animals, and another to serve as the office of Wells Fargo and later the American Railway Express. Now, compounding of minerals, herbs, sometimes toxins, and other sketchy ingredients was the source of most medicines at that time. Shown here is a picture of a compounding book of ingredients generously shown to me by Myra Elias and kept by her grandfather, Magnus Anderson, who for a short time worked for JB. Now, the gentleman in the middle is Magnus himself, who Myra quite readily admitted to me was one good-looking man. To his left stands the Greek, excuse me. To the left stands the Greek, George Auguste. Wine and other forms of alcohol were essential ingredients for most of these concoctions. I have to say that compounding medicines is a subject unto itself, and someday I shall have to explore it more fully, especially since our home resides in part of the old Beachy estate, which made its money from selling compounded medicine through the Farney Medical Company, which the Beachys owned. In 1880, around 100 Indians congregated in the street outside the drugstore to sell ginseng. They arrived by Mackinaw boats and camped with their squaws and families in front of the fence. Great quantities of ginseng were brought in bags and colorful woven baskets and stored inside the fence. The tribal members had been lured by an offer for cash by a New York businessman who paid $1,000 in gold for this precious commodity. It's a lot of money at that time. Ginseng was used to revitalize and replenish vital energy at that time, treating fatigue, insomnia, yes, and even impotence. It was the equivalent of today's Viagra. To give you an idea of what the store may have looked like inside, I took several pictures of the pharmacy of the Madonna in Bolzano, Italy, where Mika was born. For 4 generations since 1888, it has been in the hands of the Leibel family, 20 years after J.B. Collins established the store in Frankfort. La Madonna opened for business, however, way before that in 1443, and retains its old world charm with its floor-to-ceiling compounding bottles and intricate cabinetry. Now, I doubt frescoes would have adorned the ceiling of the Collins drugstore, but I think you get the picture of what it looked like. In 1868, J.B. married Josephine Lapham of Rockford, Michigan, the daughter of the Honorable Judge Lapham. Of their 7 children, one, Roy, born in 1873, became a pharmacist. He grew up in the store and obtained his pharmacy degree so he could continue the Collins name. By all counts, his relationship with his father was excellent, and shared the kind of adventurousness which JB had. Returning to the store one day from a business trip to Chicago to meet some of the store's suppliers, all while navigating the windy city on bicycle, Roy was greeted with a sign that had been placed on the storefront saying, J.B. Collins and Son. I think you can see it right here. Now, this was an act of great generosity on the part of J.B., and he obviously looked to Roy as a clear bearer of the Collins torch. A typical advertisement in 1897 in the newspaper would have shown the kind of wares sold in the store. Not a great deal different from the merchandise sold in the original store. Paints, oils, putty, varnish, glazier tools, and paintbrushes, along with Ayers and Jane's celebrated medicines, all sold cheap for cash. As one can imagine, stores like this were tinder boxes ready to ignite, which we saw happen already on several occasions. Compounding was the way in which pharmacists well into the 20th century created medicines they both advertised and sold. And women seemed most susceptible to ingest their contents and suffer their effects. Now, most of the medicines had alcohol as its base, and I would draw your attention also to the cigar box here. Cigar boxes, which serves in the Collins drugstore as a storage for bank receipts. Here are additional examples of what would have been seen on the store shelves. These pictures of medicine bottles and cigar boxes were taken at Dee and Nancy Hewitt's home. This last bottle is triangular in shape for a good reason. It was identifiable as poisonous or dangerous, so one might know its contents by feeling the body's contour in the middle of the night when they staggered from bed without glasses or light to take medicine. Collins drugstore also sold both spirits and tobacco in plentiful supply. That fact was possibly the reason why years later, Charles Diedrichson, who worked as a pharmacist briefly in the Collins drugstore, started his own pharmacy down the street in 1924. He disapproved of selling liquor. That is mere speculation, however, and a more likely reason was the appearance of Milford Porter, who with Roy's daughter Grace took over the Collins drugstore around that time. By 1900, the store represented Wells Fargo, and in the 1920s, the American Railway Express freight would come in on the Ann Arbor Railroad, and a healthy drayage business arose around town, transporting items arrived by rail. In 1901, at the age of 68, J.B. died of neuralgia of the heart. That is, he had a fatal heart attack. He worked in the store the very evening of his death. If you wanted to recount the years J.B. spent in Frankfort, it would have recorded the history of a town from its beginnings to its flourishing, its business, its tragedies, and its comedies. His obituary stated that he was identified with every movement which had for its object the betterment of Benzie County and Frankfort, and during his long residence in that city, he filled many positions of public trust. Services were held in the First Congregational Church of Frankfort, which had opened its doors on Forest Avenue to the public in 1868, the very year J.B. had opened his store on Main Street. With the passage of J.B., Roy took full control of the drugstore. 2 years after J.B.'s death, Roy opened another drugstore in Alberta, which stayed open for 14 years, closing in 1917 due to labor shortages due to the Great War. 1904 was a big year for Roy. He married George Smith's daughter, Jessie, of Frankfort. Their only child, Grace, worked her entire childhood in the pharmacy, helping with the soda fountain, which was ever busy, especially on Saturday nights after the civic band played. Grace went on to Ferris Institute to get her pharmacy degree and married one of her classmates, Milford Porter, in 1929. The married couple worked in the store, and in 1935, the two of them took over the business when Roy retired. Roy was a colorful figure. Well known to all, president of the State Bank, and just a general prankster. He was a philosopher and a veritable encyclopedia of Frankfort's early history. He would often tell stories of how pigeons were so numerous they would blot out the sun at night, during the day, and make the day black. He also talked about the days in which he had to bury bodies due to the Black Plague, or of giving smallpox vaccinations for 25 cents apiece. As a boy, he would frequently hop aboard a schooner or package freighter and travel across lake to Wisconsin. In 1900, Roy got into trouble with the constabulary when he put a skeleton in the window of the store. Earlier, a skeleton had been uncovered during excavation of the Frontenac Hotel. Revelers quickly proclaimed that it was the skeleton of Father Jacques Marquet, a 17th century missionary explorer who brought Christianity to the Indians in the area. A lively celebration spontaneously erupted in the streets. Several days later, however, a second skeleton was discovered by a couple of visiting Swedes. Roy absconded with it, dressed it up, and put it in the window of the drugstore. He hung a sign on it proclaiming it to be the skeletal remains of Father Marquette II. The police asked him politely to take it down because it was causing such a ruckus in the street. He complied without much ado. Roy would often talk about the time William Jennings Bryan and Elbert Hubbard gave speeches at the corner of 4th and Main at the site of the corner bandstand. Bryan was an accomplished orator, known as the Great Commoner, due to his faith in the wisdom of common people, and a politician who ran 3 times as the Democratic candidate for president in 1896, 1900, and 1908. Elbert Hubbard, on the other hand, was a professed anarchist, talented writer, publisher, and artist who was noted for having said, "Do not take life too seriously. You will never get out of it alive." He was also noted to have said, "Never explain. Your friends in no way need it, and your enemies will not believe you anyway." Now, one of Roy's good friends was Charlie Slyfield, Magnus Anderson's father-in-law. Charlie was the son of Doc A.J. Slyfield, who, like J.B., was one of the early pioneers of Frankfort. Roy would often ride on the Jesse Slyfield tug, named after A.J.'s youngest child. I know a bit about the Slyfield family by speaking with Myra. Her grandfather, Magnus Anderson, began working in the Collins drugstore at the age of 15 and became a notable pharmacist in his own right. In one of his frequent boat trips aboard the tug, Roy was shown by A.J. 7 unmarked graves sites of sailors who went down in the water along with their boats between Frankfort and Point Betsy. Charles Diedrichson was a young clerk at the Collins drugstore from 1914 to 1918, and Roy encouraged Charles to get his pharmacy degree, which he did at Ferris State from 1919 to 1920. He worked as an apprentice pharmacist at the Collins drugstore from 1920 to 1924, at which time he opened his own drugstore down the street, almost at the same site of the drugstore which had burned to the ground about a century before. Now, while we're on the subject, and this is Charlie on your left, while we're on the subject of the Diedrichson drugstore, it was in operation from 1924 to 1993. Speaking with his granddaughter, Marianne Short, the exact same goods, minus alcohol and cigarettes, were sold and distributed from Diedrichson. The soda fountain was busy and business was brisk. In 1960, the store was bought by Byron Norton when Charles passed away by a heart attack. By all accounts, Byron had a wicked sense of humor, but at the same time was very civic-minded and sensitive to the needs of others. The store prospered and did well and stayed in operation until 1993, but in the summer of 1981, it burned to the ground, apparently due to poor wiring, which had recently been done in the basement of the store by a novice electrician who swiftly left town after the blaze. Firemen from as far away as Northport came to extinguish the fire, which started at 6 p.m. and ended in the morning the next day. The first floor was supported by an enormous beam, which continued to burn the entire night until it no longer could. According to Mary Ann, the pharmacy was reopened in some form the next day and stayed open until the restored establishment was reopened the next year, thanks to the generosity of the Hewitts and other people in town. Returning to the Collins family once again, Grace and Milford had two daughters, Jean and Faith. Faith's here tonight. Thank you. Faith became a pharmacist and worked in the Collins drugstore. She is now retired, but continues to live in the family home on Front Street. I spent some time speaking with Faith about Roy and Grace. She possessed a notebook kept by Roy, which records the jokes he often told. That I haven't been able to see it may either represent a family treasure not willingly shared, or a treasure trove of splendid hunting jokes. But Milford was also a hunter. I had mentioned previously that the circuit judge would often ask customers downstairs to serve as jurors in the courtroom upstairs. Once, when one of Milford's duck hunting buddies was being tried by the circuit judge on the second floor for the offense of hunting out of season, Milford volunteered to be on the jury. He grabbed some of his other hunting friends, also buddies of the accused, and had them serve in the jury as well. The plaintiff had already admitted his guilt and was obviously remorseful, but soon became joyous when the jury of his peers unanimously found him not guilty. The judge just shook his head in disbelief. In any case, much in the way of philanthropy came from the Collins family. For many years, the store was the site of the Salvation Army, donating goods and services for families in need, especially around Christmas. Milford and Grace were quick to ask friends to give donations for needy families around the time of holidays. Donations not only came from townspeople, but also summer cottage owners and vacationers. The spirit of giving has been a widely seen phenomena, not only in Frankfort, but in all of Benzonia County, as we all know. Now, a conversation about the Collins drugstore would not be complete without mentioning Harley Herbin, who managed, here's Harley right there. Sorry, that's the best picture I have of him, who managed the store beginning in 1924 and worked faithfully in 1973. Harley made sure the soda fountain was supplied with freshly roasted nuts. The Collins drugstore nut container now sits proudly in Dee and Nancy's home in Traverse City. Harley also transported all the orders for liquor from the state liquor store down the street and placed them on the shelves of the drugstore. Harley was loved and respected by everyone, all apparently except the state liquor inspector. Now, the modern drugstore, as we know it, was built in 1939 and opened in 1940. Ozzie Ness and Albert McKinnon poured solid concrete and used reinforced steel to make it the most fireproof building in the entire city. Clearly, the pharmacists and townspeople had learned their lesson about the necessity of fireproofing. After the foundation was dug by Ozzie's team of horses, a cement slab was laid and the furnace was fired up. The concrete walls for the foundation were poured in one day from daybreak to 10 p.m., with their toils laced with a few sips now and then of a pint they had with them. That night, the furnace was fired and the foundation was covered with canvas. Blowers kept the walls from freezing, as was winter, and the steam escaping from under the tarps was a really amusing and unusual sight. The old walnut cabinetry was transferred to the new building. In the back of the new store, Dr. Troutman and Dr. Thacker saw patients. The old building next door was rented by Bob Mouseth and Elvin Olson for electrical and a gift shop. The old shop was subsequently raised in 1948. The Greeks' giant copper kettle and great marble slab used for making candy years before were left in the street prior to raising the old store, only to be missing the next day, taken by a souvenir by some appreciative admirer. The first soda fountain ever placed in the Collins drugstore had a counter and tables that would accommodate 60 people. When it was redesigned in 1956, many of the stools were eliminated, but it did not discourage customers from coming in and ordering their favorite phosphates, sodas, malts, black and whites, and floats. The ice cream naturally was hand dipped. In 1925, ice cream cones were a nickel. Double dips were a dime. Sundaes and sodas were 15 cents. And a thick chocolate malted milkshake was 20 cents. But the banana split topped it all. Costing 25 cents, it had one whole banana, 3 scoops of ice cream, 3 kinds of toppings, and a big maraschino cherry on top. How yummy is that? The drugstore started a self-service model in 1956. In 1958, Don Gullett was hired as the pharmacist. He was trained in Colorado, but was from Nebraska, and his wife Ellie was from Chesaning near Saginaw. Ownership was shared between the Gulletts and the Porters in 1958. In 1968, the store celebrated its 100th year of operation, and in 1971, Squibb presented it with a plaque for its 1 millionth prescription. In 1972, Milford and Grace sold the store to Don and Ellie, ending 106 years of sole ownership by J.B. Collins and his descendants. Don was described as a kind, very kind, civic-minded individual who tragically lost his life in 1975. In 1976, the store was bought by Dee and Nancy Hewitt, who changed the name to the Community Drugstore. Dee was drawn to North Michigan. Here's Dee, in case you can't see him. He's near the back row back there with Nancy. Dee was drawn to North Michigan, just as JB had been years before. I visited Dee and Nancy 2 weeks ago and found them healthy and quite active. Dee here stands behind the desk, which had been in the back room of the Collins drugstore for years. In their home are many relics of the old pharmacy, and I like this ruler from the Collins drugstore, which has printed on it another good rule to deal with. There are various drug compounding devices and bottles of various kinds. I forgot to take a picture of Nancy, but I did find a great picture of the two of them while viewing carefully the photo on the top shelf of this medicine cabinet. Rick McCrae began working in the store in 1992, and the Hewitts sold the store to him in 1998. Rick changed the name of the store to the Corner Drugstore in 2008. Last year, Rick began partnering with a Shop and Save pharmacy in Benzonia, then subsequently transferred all the Corner Drugstore's prescription service there. The old Corner Drugstore is now the Corner Toy Store, run by Ben and his family. It also remains a service center for mail delivery, but not the Wells Fargo nor the American Railway, but the UPS. In the old space where Doctors Thacker and Troutman once had their offices is a children's clothing boutique run by Ben's wife, Trish. Now, I will not be the first and only person to say that I miss getting my drugs at the Corner Drugstore. With its prescription service closed, I and most folks in town are now forced to fill prescriptions 20 minutes away in Benzonia. Earlier this year, moreover, I was compelled to transfer my prescription service once again, this time to a box store in Traverse City, the CVS. One of my medications was just a little bit too expensive to fill in Benzonia. I was told by Barney at the Shop and Save that if they tried to sell me the drug I needed, they would lose hundreds of dollars because of it. The reimbursement for dispensing my drug from intermediaries in the pharmaceutical supply chain would be far less than the amount they would get for the wholesale product that they could get. It got me to look at where exactly our healthcare dollar is going today for drugs in America. I found that half of what we as Americans now spend on getting drugs goes to middlemen who stand between the drug manufacturer and the pharmacist, the most egregious of which are PBMs, or patient benefit managers. Initially, they were created to save patients and the health system money, But through mergers with huge health insurers like CVS, Cigna, and US Health, they increasingly dictate how much you spend out of pocket, how much pharmacies are reimbursed for filling prescription, and where you go to get drugs. Now, this is a somewhat complicated chart, and I'll try and simplify it in the short time I have. But the center of the drug distribution in America is this PBM, this patient benefit manager, which negotiates with manufacturers of drugs, pharmacists, pharmaceutical companies, prices for their bosses, the healthcare insurance plans. So the PBM will negotiate prices, but the manufacturers won't reduce their prices, rather they'll give a rebate instead. The PBM takes a cut of that rebate and then passes it on to the insurer. The pharmacist buys his drugs on the wholesale market and relies on the PBM for its reimbursement. The PBM takes the drugs, or pays the pharmacy for the drug, often less than what the pharmacist bought it for, making it very, very difficult to keep it sustained. The patient's kind of left here in right field, if you will, because there's a tremendous incentive to sell high-priced drugs whose price keep going up, rather than generic drugs where there are no rebates involved. The patient is stuck with a lot of the cost that goes up, so the copay keeps going up. So the net result of this, and in addition, I should mention that the PBM receives fees from the manufacturer for the distribution systems they set up over the last 34 years, and also from the health plan that uses them to negotiate with the manufacturer. These organizations called GPOs are in countries that are tax-free, like Ireland, and it's very opaque. They don't know exactly how much money is coming in terms of the fees. It's very difficult to know, and every pharmaceutical company deals with its own PBM with itself. So this is the kind of system we now are strapped with having in America. There's work right now in Congress to try and reduce the might of these PBMs, but these PBMs made more than Ford and Home Depot did last year. So it's a very, very powerful and a very powerful lobby. The net effect that we are experiencing, the net effect of all this is our pharmacy deserts. Independent drugstores are being forced out of business by behemoth companies and their intermediaries. This slide shows you the extent of this phenomena in America with the dark dots representing stores largely in rural areas that have closed since 2015. I believe I've exceeded actually my time in presenting the history of the Collins drugstore, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions and get into greater details about the fate of small town pharmacies due to our pharmaceutical industry and all the intermediaries. But I'd be willing to take any questions that you may have, and thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.
All righty. If you do have any questions, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you.
Thank you. Great presentation. 63 years ago, I lived in Cadillac, Michigan, and I just graduated. I was a senior in high school, 18 years old, and my neighbor on Cody Street, he was a manager of Swift Ice Cream Company, and they needed a delivery boy to deliver ice cream to Traverse City, and then on the way back to stop in Frankfort, and then in Mesik, Michigan, and then back to Cadillac. My two best accounts were Collin's drugstore, the soda fountain. Well, all the young girls worked, which was enjoyable for me. And also Beulah Drugstore was the both were my best accounts. at Collin's drugstore, I would deliver tubs of 3-gallon tubs of ice cream, and each tub would have 97 scoops, just for your information.
Wow.
And also, I would deliver
My primary
ice
source.
cream bars, push-ups, popsicles, fudgsicles, and also in this area, here was Fairchild's Market, which is no longer here. And then I used to deliver ice cream to the Cherry Hut, Dubonnet Cherry. That was, they were open back in the 50s. And so that was my Collins drugstore, as I said before, was very popular store. Then even when I moved back to Frankfort 4 years ago, I used to get my prescriptions there. And was sorry that they moved to Shop and Save. But then also, in my history, I attended Ferris State. It was Ferris Institute, then Ferris State College, then Ferris State University. But I graduated, and it was a pharmaceutical school at that time, well known in the area. So anyway, thank you for the presentation.
Matt, we have a question.
Yeah, hi, just to kind of expand on your graph up there and everything else. About 5 years ago, we're going to Nova Scotia, and I called around for an EpiPen, CVS, and all the other ones, and they were saying $600. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll go to Doug Cole's because we're going to Canada. Would you give me a prescription? And he said, yes. So on our way out to Nova Scotia, I stopped at the drugstore and I said, here's my prescription. And they said, well, there's some bad news and there's some good news. I said, what's the bad news? I can't take a US prescription.
Oh.
What's the good news? You don't need one in Canada. And on top of that, they said it's only $100 versus $600. So that really highlights what you had up there on the screen.
Yeah. And you know, there are many examples of drugs being sold, for example, at Costco, allergy drugs for $20, and at a CVS or some other store like that being sold for $120. So, I mean, this is, yeah.
Any other questions? Any questions online?
Just a thank you from Catherine Nowinski. Thank you so much for an amazing talk and connecting that history to the contemporary system. Really appreciate the tie-ins to illuminate the presence of the past.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
In the Benzie Home movies, volume 1, I believe it was, is a lot of footage that was shot mostly by Milford Porter, because he also had the Kodak dealership in town and was a movie taking machine. And we digitized it, and there's footage of a wonderful party of all the drugstore staff that at Lower Herring Lake at the Collins Cottage, which I think Faith still has, in rowboats and splashing each other with water and wrestling, trying to throw each other in the water. And some footage of Roy in his suit, of all things, presiding on the dock. And he was really a short little guy. And there's a lot of other footage that Milford shot, including Roy and his wife and Dr. Pate, the dentist, and his wife leaving in their sedan for their annual trip to Florida and waving it to everyone.
I'd like to show too that this is JB's home at the corner at 330 Forest Avenue. This is the way, Faith was nice to give me this slide. This is the way it looked like in the last century. Jabe. This is Roy's house at 324, Judy Welch's home. And this face home, this is Grace and Milford's home, just for you. Always wonder where this is kind of pharmacy row.
I have a quick question. Where in Collin's Drug was the soda fountain?
Where was the soda fountain?
Yeah.
I'm not clear on that, to be honest with you. I think it was along the side wall. But I've also heard it was kind of at the back where the pharmacist in the corner drugstore resided, but I don't know. Yeah. Where was it? Good.
Well, I worked as a soda jerk there, and I probably scooped some of the ice cream you delivered.
What is your name?
Yes, it was west of the pharmacy, and it was right against the wall where you saw the picture, of the ceramic or black windows.
Yes.
It was right below that. So it was right on, what is that, 3rd Street or 4th Street, I think.
We're straight.
Yes. So I have very fond memories of working there.
How many stools did the soda fountain have at that time?
Oh, I would say about 5 or 6
Okay,
stools.
yeah.
But
They
I
didn't like to
remember
hate it.
people coming in on Saturday night, bringing their children in, all dressed up for ice cream.
Mhm.
And that was fun to serve them. And I remember some of the children, that looked so cute in their little dresses and suits and.
Who else sold ice cream on Main Street at that time?
I
Scoop
think,
wasn't there in the,
Dickerson's also had a soda fountain.
yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did. Right, and I'm still
That
friends
was-
with one of the girls that worked there that worked as a soda fountain jerk. So,
Fantastic.
All righty, let's give Rob another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.